Hello, friends. My name is Shrouk El-Attar, or Shrouk Mohammed Ibrahim Mahmoud Mustafa El-Attar is actually my full name. I am an engineer by day, belly dancer by night, 24/7 refugee, and I've been involved with STAR since 2009, kind of illegally, because I wasn't allowed to be a student, and I just kind of infiltrated STAR and infiltrated your committee meetings, and I think everybody everybody knew that I wasn't on the committee, but I think just British people are so nice, and they were just like, oh, okay, all right, I guess she's on the committee meeting now. What else? I have a few cool awards. BBC 100 Most Influential Women in the World 2018, apparently. Young Woman Engineer of Young Woman of the Year for United Nations Refugee Agency 2018, and top 6 young women engineers in this country this year and last year. Hello, nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you. So me in a nutshell. So I'm a former refugee, came to the UK when I was about 8 years old. So sort of have experience of the asylum system, but it's not all that fresh and it's changed a lot since then. I sort of grew up in London for a long time and sort of worked my way up, eventually found my way towards sort of politics and things, and ended up campaigning at uni for LGBTQ rights, and sort of it became my career path essentially. So I've worked as a campaigner in Amnesty International UK and Save the Children most recently, both sort of focusing a lot on conflict and sort of touching on the reasons why people flee more than anything else. But now I've joined the refugee sector as head of comms and campaigns at UK Welcomes Refugees. We're a very small organisation focusing on community sponsorship, and I want to try and make it more diverse and bring more people into it and make it less white. I'm also an organiser with CharitySoWhite, and essentially, like both Amnesty and Save the Children are great organizations, but like they are very white spaces, and we know that like charity sectors as a whole is a very white space. And I think just that feeling of being in a big organization, not really seeing other people that sort of had similar experiences to you, and feeling like you're the only ones fighting against the system, was something that I found quite commonly throughout the sector. And like CharitySoWhite basically just became that conversation coming to the surface. It was a hashtag at first, and then we sort of built it out into an organizing group, trying to organize people of color within the sector and trying to open up that discussion in the public space and make sort of public accountability a really big part of our conversation with leadership around race in the sector. And my biggest memory of this when it comes to the refugee sector was back in February, before lockdown and everything, did and anti-racism training for 100 or so refugee leaders in the refugee sector space, and it was predominantly white, and I just remember, like, I didn't even mention that I had lived experience as a refugee, and I've been reflecting and thinking like something about that space made me feel like I can't actually talk about this, and like my professional hats as a campaigner and as an organizer is the thing that brings me into this space, not like my lived experience itself. So that's a whole thing that's going through my head at the moment, and yeah, should be a pretty interesting conversation.
Yeah, that's. Oh, sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to jump in or not.
Yeah, do it.
I'm so excited to like learn about what work you do with CharitySoWhite. I love the name. So were you one of the founding members, or when did it come about? Tell me more.
So the story basically. So I don't know if anyone remembers that there was this thing with Citizens Advice where there was a training session that had some like really problematic content, and sort of that's where the conversation started, just talking about this. This was back in July, August last year.
Okay. Oh, that's kind of recent.
Yeah. So we've only been around for about a year, and the 4 founders early on were just sort of trying to. They're essentially just friends and managing this conversation, building it out. And I joined in about October that year, when they realized there's too many things coming at them and like this is growing at a really fast pace. So they needed to bring more people into the committee. Yeah. So I've been in the committee for about a year now as well. And in that time, it's basically just been about firefighting and just responding to all of the sort of opportunities and sort of trying to bring race into the conversation as much as possible in the sector, and really trying to challenge the narrative around it when, you know, we talk about equality and diversity and all of this stuff, and really sort of vague and obscure language, and actually trying to talk about race, and also doing a lot of work, direct advocacy work with leaders in the sector, and trying to bring them into the space and really talk about it openly. And now we're in a period where like we have grown out of that firefighting, out of that response, and
Mm.
we need to sort of set up our strategies. We've sort of spent a couple of months working and focusing on sort of doing deep thinking and strategizing around where we want to take this and sort of in a long term, and how do we build this out into a longer term movement rather than just an exhausting exercise in firefighting and racism, anti-racism.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, like, to be where I'm at Star, I had to break the rules. So kind of with Star training, when you're on a committee, you're not supposed to be friends with the people you're helping. Who, you know, I guess like it's a two-way relationship, but I guess people learn that later on rather than at the start. And you know, I became friends with the people on the committee, even though I was a refugee. They're supposed to help, and it's like kind of, or for example, I had some friends who went and worked in the refugee camps in Greece, and they were doing all the kind of, they were really overworked, but at the same time, the people they were helping, the refugees there, like had nothing else to do, and they weren't being empowered to like be trained to go and do that work for themselves. And I don't know what the right answers is, because I had, when I was on the committee, and I did give my number to like some asylum seekers that I was working with, and then people started calling me up at 3 a.m. So it's like, how do you draw that boundary and also not be, you know, this white savior mentality?
That's
I
a
don't know
really,
what you
really
think of that.
important, that's a really important question, because I think that separation is something that I see in the refugee sector in particular, but I also see around charities as a whole. So when you sort of really strip it back to the whole sort of colonialist structure of charity, and sort of how neocolonialism still sort of really thrives through the charity sector as a whole, like there's either it's service users and staff, or it's human rights defenders and stuff. Like there's this separation that we create, and I think it's the same within the refugee sector, where like lived experience counts, but only to a certain extent. And it's sort of like you have the staff group who's sort of over here doing the sort of the work, who's doing all the legal stuff and sort of building the narrative essentially and the story that we're telling in terms of trying to mobilize and sort of organize the public towards helping and supporting refugee rights. And lived experience becomes a thing, a layer that is a nice story to add, and it adds authenticity to what we're saying. And it's sort of like we're inserting a story into a narrative that we've already made. We're not actually inviting refugees into the room to build that narrative together. We're not really sort of proactively building them into the root of the strategy process to determine what we're going to do. And that is a problem that filters throughout the charity sector. And it means that like when we're working with refugees, that separation becomes a problem, because you do have to have boundaries, and you do have to have sort of a line in the sand in terms of what a right relationship is. And like this whole thing can be really overwhelming too. But you also have to remember these are people, and like you have to think of them like there's certain accessibility things you need to think about in terms of language and all the various other things. But it's just that separation to me feels quite unhealthy, and I think we need
What
to
does
earlier
what
on.
does the future look like? What does a healthy kind of boundary and at the same time inclusion look like?
I think it has like I mean, with CharitySoWhite in particular, like we talk about reflection a lot, and I think the future starts with just taking the time as a sector, as people in working in the sector, to just really reflect on like the structures and the behaviors that we've built up over the years, and really think critically about them. I think we just have to see people as people and see the commonality between us. Like there's different journeys that we've all had, but there's lots that we have in common, and you have to connect with people at that level and fundamentally rather
and I
than.
think students are incredible at doing that. Students do that so amazingly.
Exactly.
But yeah, you've probably, everybody else on the committee has heard me say this story 3 million times, but I remember very vividly, right, like attending this charity training with this other huge refugee charity that I'm not going to mention the name of, and they were like, oh, what do you do for refugees? And this charity was like, we do refugee empowerment. And I was like, I have never once accessed you and felt empowered. I felt helped, but it was definitely like a parent-child relationship, and there was no way for me to grow. It was against the rules for me to grow. There were no ways that I could take to be at that position. It was always, I was forced to be here, and they were forced to be there. So it's not just kind of the power dynamic, it's the blindness to the power dynamic, is that people don't see it. People do genuinely think they're empowering us. And
Yeah.
Have you felt that?
Totally. And I think something you said really rings home. It's that parent-child relationship, and it's the way, just how paternalistic the whole thing can be.
Yeah.
And when you like looking at it from community sponsorship and like other sort of more, so like I guess the way that different groups relate to refugees often becomes a sort of parent-child relationship, and it's
Yeah.
where
And it's people like with really good intentions.
uh,
Like these people are lovely and they're trying the best, but it just don't see it.
but it is where, I don't know, power and privilege comes into it as well for me, because it's fundamentally a parent-child relationship is about power as well. It's also about love and many other things, and like there's good intentions, but it is us versus them. It's putting someone at one level as opposed to the other, and it's like, again, it's about accessibility. Like there are different ways to connect to people, there are different ways to engage with them and sort of connect to that level. But when you feel that you have a responsibility or sort of a position of power or needs to support someone, there's a certain, I don't know, it changes the relationship, and I feel like we're not doing enough to understand the needs of the other side and try and bring that voice into the decision making, because you can't talk about environment by just bringing someone into the room. You have to make sure that that person can actually speak, that their voice is heard, that they have a seat at the table, like that it's their presence isn't just tokenism, like it's not.
Yeah, that's the thing, and it's like if you feel like what you're doing is tokenism, it's because you don't know enough refugees.
Yeah.
It's, and I mean, also, okay, there are people who need building up. So if you're tokenizing somebody because you don't have the numbers, but you know what, with some training, like this person could give real value. Are you providing that? Are you doing that? Is this something that you're doing? Do you think you would have had like a different experience had you come here as an adult?
Sorry, I missed that.
Do you think you would have had a different experience if you'd come here as an adult? Because you came here when you were a child, right? Same. How old were you again? You were 8?
I was 8. So, you know,
What's your, what country is your background, if you don't mind me asking?
Ecuador.
Where, sorry?
Ecuador.
Ecuador.
Yeah, in Latin
Oh,
America.
nice.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm Egypt.
Oh, nice. So it would have been totally different. And like thinking back to that time, and I guess comparing my parents' experience to my experience, like they were both quite young. Their experiences as far as learning English was mainly through work, and we didn't really have any kind of sense of community. Like I don't really believe that community properly exists in London in a lot of ways, because like it's a mess in a lot of ways. but like I went to school, I was around kids my age, people tried to play with me and there was a lot of interaction. Like I picked up English a lot quicker because of my age.
Yeah,
all
same.
of these things make a difference. And like, while my accent has fluctuated over the years, for the most part, it's a British accent. It's
Yeah.
not that of a migrant. And there's certain things where like, I think when people aren't entirely sure where to place you, that in itself can be a privilege sometimes, because I am relatively light skinned.
Exactly. Yeah.
People don't really know much about Latin America, so it's like they don't know what box to put you in. And had I come as an adult, had I had a thicker accent, had I had a lot more things to learn and not understood things about society and culture, it would have been a radically different experience. And I don't think I would have ended up in where I am today, or at least the path would have been a hell of a lot messier than mine was.
You know, I feel awful saying this. I encourage people to keep their accents. I think accents are beautiful, and you know, I do a lot of that. But I've really worked hard to try and sound as British as I can, and even now, still I do it. And like, if I have like an American twang or some like transatlantic twang, I get offended. And I'm like, if I'm being completely honest with myself, had I come as an adult, would I try to do the same again, knowing what I know now? And the answer is yes, because I get treated better. I get treated so much better. And why, you know, and it's just such a conflicting thing, because you want to go up and tell people your accents are beautiful, embrace them. But if you're honest with yourself, if you can have this British accent, would you do it again?
Yeah. But the other side of it, for me, it's more nefarious than that for me, because like all of this is internalized from a young age. And like when I went to school and we were taken to separate classes to learn English, like it was New Labour, so it was all phonetics, and like they were like, you know, like it was what it was. But they made such a point of trying to teach you this particular type of middle class accent that I didn't hear the children around me talking. I didn't, you know, I grew up in Southeast London. There's like a lot of sort of more Cockney accents and sort of more Peckham
Oh,
stuff.
I had a different
And I didn't
experience.
pick
That's
that
so
up.
interesting.
In a lot of ways, like working from home and not being around white middle class people all day every day means that I'm not actually speaking like that anymore. And like
I know, yeah.
again, So like it is internalized, and you start
Yeah.
thinking, I need to talk a particular way and sound more middle class to access that privilege that comes with that.
Yeah, I mean, put my hand up and say I've got internalized racism. I'm
Hmm.
queer, I'm a woman, and I am brown. I am unconsciously racist, I am unconsciously homophobic, and I'm unconsciously sexist. And it's like we learn stuff so young to survive. And I used to like straighten my hair every single day. Like I'd spend hours straightening it to fit in, not because I felt I wanted to, I felt I had to. Obviously, you know, if somebody wants to straighten their hair, that's completely fine. But it wasn't out of choice. It wasn't because like, oh yeah, I think it will look nice. It was like, oh, I want to look like everybody else. And I had like I had a white name. I used to tell people, hey, call me Jessica. Yeah. I could see like there are some questions that are coming in. I'm not sure if Amos, or would you be up for answering some of the questions that are coming in? Amos, would you be able to help us by reading some?
Yeah, of course. There's a question that's come in two parts. So I'm going to ask the first part first, and
Okay.
then when the second one comes. So we've heard about negative experiences that the two of you have had with regard to sort of this idea of empowerment. So what good experiences have you had where you did feel empowered, either by a charity or by an individual? So what does good empowerment look like to you?
Would you like to answer that first, John, or do you want me to go?
Yeah. So I think for me, I can't point out to any particular experience, because I think a lot of my own refugee experience was, and sort of growing up, was just trying to hide that fact and trying to sort of not tell people my story.
Yeah.
Whereas I think one of the best experiences I've had lately, you know, joining a new organization, having lots of one-to-ones with people across the sector, across the boards and everything else, just to find contacts. Like I've told my story so many times now, and I think the response has been quite different to what I'm used to getting when I tell my story. And
Yeah.
like been less sort of frustrating questions. There's been less people commenting and saying, "Oh, your English is great," or anything condescending like that. And like it's been a
Oh
lot.
God.
So
God,
that
those.
positive. People's intentions are in the right place, and
Yeah.
people are connecting to that story in a different way that I'm used to, and that's been quite nice.
I forgot that. You just reminded me. I forgot. You're right. I've not been told that in a really long time, but it used to be a constant thing. Oh, your English is great. I'm like, thanks. Lived here half of my life, literally. Thank you. How many languages do you speak? For me, so I think Star has its problems. We're like, I'm not gonna lie, but for me, I felt really empowered by Star. Like my life has been changed by being involved in Star. And it's that kind of making sure that you've got a place at the table. Is us for let's say the Equal Access campaign, having stories of people with lived experiences, and not just on record, not just in the petitions, it's actually people leading it. And having kind of a space on the trustee board. I don't know how long now, but a while. So I feel really that's what empowerment looks like to me, and I think we need to do a bit more of that at a student level, probably. And the thing is, I think students are doing it, just like against the rules of it. But I think we need to make valid what's the term, like policies that allows that to happen at a lower level more. Shall we take more questions?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean the next question, I think there's sort of two parts. Well, there's a part that I'm going to add on. So the second part of the question that we heard was, so what good practice can you suggest to model empowering relationships between refugees and asylum seekers and the refugee sector? And I thought I'd be really interested just to add in something of the elephant in the room, which is when we talk about racial justice, especially in this current moment, we talk a lot about anti-Black racism. And I'm not going to speak for either of you, but as people where that voice may be missing in this conversation, how do we definitely sort of hit that sort of very, very, very clearly within empowering those, well, people of a variety of backgrounds from the refugee sector?
So were you answering the question or not? So sorry, I got confused. So you said that there is the elephant in the room. There is no Black representation right now that I can see, right? Yeah. So I don't feel like I can add much to that because I'm not, like, I'm brown. I don't identify as Black. And it would be good to have people who do identify as Black to be able to add that.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, it's really important that like listening is the most important part of it. Try and sort of seek out that voice, try and sort of really educate yourself, but also don't make Black people do that work for you. Don't ask them to like just tell you what to think. And like for me, the biggest part of it, particularly over the last few years and within CharitySoWhite has helped a lot, is just tackling my own anti-Blackness. Like, you know, the Latin community has a huge problem with anti-Blackness, and it stems from all sorts of complicated histories with colonialism and slavery and everything else. And like combating all of these things and catching these things within myself, within my family interactions and everything else is my sort of main aim in terms of like combating anti-Blackness. And you do have to really go to that level, or that really personal level of thinking like, how do I help this system of oppression continue?
Yeah, and in Egypt, there's a lot of colorism as well. So I think it's important to recognize that even us as Black and brown people can be super not good, y'all. Not good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what was the first part of the question?
So it was, and we had a couple of questions that hit up this similarly, which is what good practice can you suggest to model empowering relationships between refugees and asylum seekers and the charity sector?
I'll talk a bit from what I want to do. It's too early to like tell you how it's gone, but essentially building a new organization with UK Welcomes Refugees, I'm very much, it's good that like we're at a place where essentially the director and myself both have lived experience of being refugees. We both like lived experiences present on that in the board level and at sort of executive level, which is great. And I want to take that further and sort of like, I don't want to rush strategy. I don't want to sort of just do a lot of thinking on my own and sort of present like, this is what we need to do and this is how we're going to do it. And this is where refugee voices come in and this is the stories we want. I want to take my time building relationships, understanding how community sponsorship groups work, getting to know refugee families, and just really give them a voice, sort of like trying to cut through the sort of interactive, the transactional interactions that you often have with this sort of approach, and just try and get to the root of like, what has their experience actually been like? What do they want to say? What do they want the sort of people more widely to know? And try and get them to that strategy level. Like, don't think just as like a story to tell or a piece of content to put on social media to sort of get awareness or attention from white people in your audience pool. Think of them as really true allies that will help you build a stronger and better strategy in the long term too, and sort of come to them with the difficult questions, work through those together.
And have you been able to apply that with other charities, with other organizations, or have you not crossed that stage yet?
A little bit. So at Save the Children, before I left, I was working a part of a big global group to basically, like, the problem with Save the Children is we don't listen to children and we don't really have rights. Like, we don't have child activists, they don't have child activists on the board. And like, it's a problem that everyone's aware of, but like the structures are so layered and it's such a massive organization that it takes a lot of work to make that change. So what we were doing is developing campaign planning resources for child activists. So at the very first stage, just thinking like we want child activists to be able to lead their own campaigns, to do the work, to have all this sort of framework of support so that covers both like campaign strategy development and sort of good strategic thinking, but also well-being, safety online, and all these different aspects of it. That launch of that had to change because of COVID, but there's resources happening out there, and now that sort of work is happening in refugee camps and a whole bunch of different contexts around the world with children sort of learning more about campaigning and leading their campaigns. The next stage of all of that is the stage that takes a long time, where you then have to convince everyone else in the machinery of the organization that this is worthwhile and you should listen to these strategies and we should adopt and work with the children to deliver them. But my focus initially was making sure that like we give children what they need to do the campaigning and do the thinking and do the leadership they need, and we worry about the politics later.
About the politics. I like that style. I like that style. That's incredible. I can't wait can't wait to see what comes out of that next. That's amazing.
Fantastic. One of the things that you touched on before was about sort of these well-meaning microaggressions that you might hear and pick up. And I'm interested, as well as sort of, there was a question in the chat about how you respond to that. But as well as sort of the reactive, what are there proactive steps to sort of really identify what those microaggressions look like and how to stop them at source, so that you're not the one having to do the work, other people can do it as well?
I'm happy to answer that quickly first. Honestly, for me, there's many different ways and they're all valid. For me, sometimes the easiest thing is just pick your battles, and sometimes I just smile and say thank you, because you know what, I don't have the headspace to deal with that right now. How do I not have to do the work all the time? I guess I find myself in a really nice community of people who are happy to do that work for me. Sometimes, but yeah, most of the time I'll just be like, you know what, no headspace today, thanks, smile, leave. I don't know how you deal with it, Jon.
It's a process, and to be honest, I think one of the parts of it is that it isn't an immediate reaction. It isn't like you don't immediately hear it and think like this is a bad thing. You like, if someone comments on something like that, or you get something like that, you might just sort of thank them and sort of you just have a normal interaction. But it sort of digs at you throughout the day.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time it isn't until I go and vent to my brown friends of what's happened that I realize like this is a really, really bad thing. We need to do something about. But it is about picking your battles, and it is about sort of looking at like, is it worth it? Do we have the energy? Is there another sort of thing we want to focus on instead? And in terms of like trying to what you do on the other side, so what my message to white people is like, I think it is just about educating yourself, and you're not always going to get it right, but how you approach the conversation around a microaggression that you might have committed against someone, or that is really important. One of the things that can be really frustrating as well, like you have a really well-intentioned person that's realized like I did something wrong and I want to have it and I want to apologize, but somehow I kind of end up consoling them, and like they're really upset with what they've done. Like you get the white tear response, and then like I'm back in this role of like it's okay.
Okay, let me look after you tonight. You're good. Here's a glass of water. But also, like, somebody once told me like there is a difference between somebody who's actually being hateful and somebody who's just not there yet, and we need to give people room to grow. So if there's somebody who has kind of the energy to educate, that's really appreciated. And if not, you know what, exiting the conversation is also fine, but understanding that difference between somebody who is hateful and somebody who's just not there yet is really important for me.
Yeah. And ultimately, it's just about connecting with yourself. You have to be critical with yourself, and sort of when you're thinking things through, just keep asking yourself questions and try and dig down to the root of it, and try and do as much of that work yourself, so that you're not then burdening other people with sort of taking care of you when you don't need it. And again, sort of try not to place that burden on one person and give them the agency to say, I can't deal with this now, and I'm not going to help you.
Yeah, absolutely. What can we do? I don't know if you're on the same page with me on this one or not, but what can we do to kind of make it also a space where people can ask questions if they want, and kind of not too scared of asking questions, but also at the same time people not having the like expectation to be the educators? How do you balance these two things out?
I think it's, for me, it's about creating the right spaces. So it depends on the conversation you're having, and I think it's just speaking to that and saying like, I will answer your questions, and just being really upfront about that. Like, I will answer any question you have. We can have a discussion about this. I'm in the right mood, and shutting it down where it's not right. I think just be really intentional and sort of like where your headspace is at, whether you can deal with it, and just sort of tell the other person like, I'm happy to have this conversation now, or I'm happy to have it tomorrow, or I'm just not happy to have it at all. Yeah,
no, that sounds fair. I'm not sure if there's more questions.
There's always more questions.
Oh, look at that. There's tons.
So something that you were hitting at there was really interesting about how you sort of have to console people who feel like they like the sort of the apologetic thing, and you end up having to, you know, you create a dynamic that's basically quite paternalistic again, or sort of very difficult. And so there's a question here about white saviorism. And it's partly because two of our star groups have just been doing a series about white saviorism that's been fascinating.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Bristol and Goldsmiths represent.
Oh, nice.
So there's a question here which goes, so do you have any tips for individual star groups to ensure that when they are advertising, volunteering and campaigning, that they don't perpetuate neo-colonial rhetoric? And should we do more to prevent creating white savior volunteers? And how do we do that? Do we run workshops and training? What do we do?
So Cardiff has done a thing. I'm not sure if they're still doing that thing or not, but when I was on the committee, there were 2 extra spaces that were not part of the official committee, but were part of the kind of our committee, that were reserved for refugees. There were like people with like lived experience, and these 2 spaces needed to be filled by those people and only those people. And if there isn't anybody who's interested in those 2 spaces, then it goes unfilled. And then trying to fill the other spaces with people with lived experiences as well. But I really liked that approach.
Yeah, and I think so there's never any easy answers for me because I'm all about deep reflection and really hard work, but like that is a very early step, or like you have to make sure you have the right voices in the room, and you have to sort of challenge, I think, look at your group, look at your sort of committee, and sort of is it all white? Is there a problem with the demographics of the backgrounds? What experience and voices are in the room? And you have to make sure that like there is that lived experience and there is that sort of connection outside of whiteness in the room. And if it isn't there, then like seek it, and that should be your objective, to just make sure you're reaching out and really doing the hard work and make it clear that you want to listen. But then like once you get that representation, it's really important to reflect on like the power dynamics in the room and think about it beyond like committee structures and sort of formal power structures, like who commands more authority in the room, who is quieter and isn't listened to, and sort of all of these other things that really sort of think about it and be critical with yourselves and think about how do you ensure that that lived experience, that voice has as much power and sway in the room as anyone else. And there will be certain situations where like you do just have to listen to the person with lived experience, the person that's non-white. If they tell you this is problematic or like this isn't sending out the right message, like you have to listen to them because they have a different perspective, and like that's the best way to catch things. All the time working in the charity sector, working with CharitySoWhite, there's all these experiences where having like we can see something that a lot of the white people can't necessarily see, and you have to just listen to that, and you have it's hard to explain sometimes, but like you just need to listen.
I think a lot of the time it just feels like it's in your head because people around you think that it's not a thing, and you're like, should I be this annoyed? Is it maybe I shouldn't be, maybe it's not a real thing.
And you can only dispel that by listening to people.
So I want to move this conversation also a bit wider into racial diversity and inclusivity at a wider level beyond people with legal status, but also sort of on the subject of whiteness and bringing in non-white non-white people into this space. We heard if you joined in our first panel, you heard all 3 of our panelists had some personal experience with STAR, whether they were members of STAR or were involved in STAR in some way. And so what we're seeing is that by and large, STAR is an engine and sort of the power behind the refugee sector. We're bringing a lot of people into that space. And so we sort of perhaps hold a little bit of the responsibility to improve racial diversity within the refugee sector at one level. So how does that happen within a sector, and how especially, I guess, how does that happen in student spaces as well? How do we improve that racial diversity within our volunteers, within our committee members and things like that?
I feel a lot of the questions have kind of the same answer. I guess the questions are also similar, but yeah, I don't know, John, if you want to answer that one.
Yeah, and again, it's around reflection, and I guess this is a wider question like that. It's something that I think every organization, every charity organization, no matter how big or small you are, has to answer, because like there is a certain demographic that we seem to hit every time. When we look at our audiences at a larger level from like a big organization, it's often white, it's middle class, it's of a certain age. It's like the demographics hit a very particular type of angle, and like that's for a reason. There is a reason why so many sort of people from this kind of background work in the charity sector, and these views are seen as professional and as the right sort of approach to take. And it's hard to challenge those sort of norms. It's hard to think about how do we expand beyond people that look like me, because I think often it's not necessarily a problem. Like you sort of join a group, it's people you get along with, it's people with a similar background. Like that's often a good thing, and like particularly when we're thinking about socializing. But you have to try and, I guess it's the deep work of trying to listen to other communities, trying to reach out to other groups, and like why aren't people from different backgrounds coming to you? What is their opinion of it? How has their response been? And I think building the spaces where you can kind of open up those discussions, be really critical of yourselves and of wider structures, and think about how you can improve that. Is it just taking a different approach to your campaigns? Is it working on different things? Is it focusing on different things? Like all of these questions is a hard and long process, but it starts by just opening up those conversations and looking outside of yourselves.
Was it in a nice way? Yeah, but I felt you know, because I felt like a lot of the questions is like, how do we diversify our charity? How do we include people from this kind of lived experience or that lived experience? And for me, it's, you know, especially if you're in a position of power, especially if you are on the committee, look at your committee, what is missing there? How can we involve these people? How can we, just even for a brainstorming session, you know?
Absolutely. I think always start from who is making decisions, who has a seat at the table. Never start from like, how do we get more people from a certain community to come as members? Because like you will feel that lack of diversity. You will feel that you're not represented here, and like that will be really off-putting. So always start by looking at yourselves within your structure and how you can make that better before you look at how you diversify your audience, because that can feel tokenistic.
Yeah. And I feel like, because I come from two worlds that kind of have similar problems, so my work in the refugee sector, but also as an engineer working in kind of engineering companies that are 99% white, male, middle class, middle-aged. And it's like a lot of the time it just feels like, so they put out all of these diversity initiatives and then you join in. And then you start feeling like they're not ready to change to suit you. They want you to change to suit them. And that's something we really need to take care of.
And I think, I mean, when you think about integration and what that means, and like,
it's assimilation. It's not integration, it's assimilation.
Exactly. And that's my problem, because like we focus so much as a sector on integration, and like it's our approach focuses on it so much, but we need to be really critical about these concepts and really critical about what all these things mean and what we're bringing someone into. And I think like, if your intention on diversifying is just to bring more brown people into the room and to sort of appear
and do exactly the same thing you were doing before, like,
yeah, that's not just. And like, you're at a level bringing brown people and people with lived experience into a dangerous situation, into a place that they won't necessarily feel comfortable, where they won't necessarily feel that they have a voice, where they're potentially at risk of microaggressions. And that's why it has to be diversity for the sake of like helping you do better work and helping you sort of help more refugees at the start of it. It cannot just be about who is in the picture and who is seen. It can't just be like a vision thing. It has to be like actually diversifying yourselves and your entity, your organization, your ideals.
And I think something really important is the language that we use. And I think students are really good at that. But I guess if you go higher and higher, it gets a bit more difficult, or people study in certain degrees. And it's like, what's this big term? Like, I've got a master's in engineering and I have no clue. What are you talking about? Okay, talking about this like issue about refugees, which, hello, I am one. No idea what you're talking about. No idea. Can we just simplify this, please? Thank you.
Exactly. And like acronyms and technical language and all of this stuff is such in the sector as well.
It makes me feel so stupid.
Exactly. Me too. It's frustrating.
Yes, it is. I'm glad it's not just me, y'all. Cool.
We're coming to the end of our time, so I wanted to just, if there are closing thoughts, closing ideas, and also ways in which people can keep learning, keep hearing from the two of you and the work that you do. Yeah, this is, please make the most of your last few minutes.
I'm so proud by what you've put together. Like, this is amazing. I'm so proud of the students who are here. We've got 71 people on the call. That's incredible. Well done, y'all.
Yeah, and I guess from my side, keep learning, like keep asking questions of yourself, keep thinking about these things. Like it is a long process, but the fact that you're here, the fact that you're hearing all of this and sort of asking yourselves those questions is important. If you want to hear more about CharitySoWhite and us, we have a website, CharitySoWhite.org, and CharitySoWhite on Twitter is our main sort of channel. And also, like, I'm massively impressed by the work that students do in terms of refugees and all the stuff that star groups do. And like, if my work within UK Welcomes can build a structure that's somewhat like this and can like be as proactive and as just as diverse and just energetic as the students are, then I will have done a good job. And like, I'm really looking towards the work that you do for inspiration for like how to get community sponsorship to be more exciting.
That's exciting.
Fantastic. Please do put the links to your social media and things in the chat, the two of you, because there are lots of people who are very interested to
Really?
you. Jon recently was commended as a rising star on social media, so by Social CEOs, which is an organization. So expect to see good things. It leads me to say thank you so much for having a fantastic, brave, and incisive conversation, and a really lovely one as well. I will let you both go. I'll take you off spotlight because you can have a break now from being seen.
You don't want my beautiful face anymore. Ouch.
If you want, I walked into that one.
Sorry. Have a beautiful rest of the session.
Thank you.
Thank you.